the summer sun blazed down on the Pacific Ocean. June 19, 1944, marked a day that would reshape naval warfare forever. Task Force 58 cut through the blue waters 200 miles west of the Mariana Islands. The massive fleet stretched across the horizon like floating cities. USS Enterprise led the formation. USS Lexington steamed alongside. USS Bunker Hill maintained position. USS Yorktown held formation. 11 other carriers completed this unprecedented armada. These 15 floating airfields prepared to launch their deadly cargo. Grumman F-6F Hellcats lined their flight decks in perfect rows. Engines warmed in the tropical heat. Pilots made final preparations. The Japanese fleet approached from the west. A collision of titans was about to begin. Vice Admiral Mark Mitchell stood on the bridge of his flagship Lexington. The responsibility for 15 carriers rested on his shoulders. Nearly 1,000 aircraft waited for his commands. This represented America's most powerful naval strike force ever assembled. Imperial Japan's desperate gamble to halt the American advance was approaching fast. The morning briefings had been clear. Intelligence confirmed Japanese carriers approaching. Their naval aviators believed they could still achieve victory. What they would discover this day would shatter everything they thought they knew about aerial combat. The age of the Zero was ending. The era of American air supremacy was about to dawn. Aboard the Japanese carrier Taiho, the morning routine continued. Lieutenant Warrant Officer Sakio Komatsu pulled on his flight suit. The ready room buzzed with nervous energy. Other pilots checked their maps one final time. The briefing had emphasized maximum strike power. American carriers had been detected east of Guam. 15 large flat tops operated in 3 separate task groups southwest of Saipan. Komatsu prepared himself mentally for combat. He would fly escort for the second attack wave. His mission was to protect the bombers during their approach. The attack promised to deliver a decisive blow against the American invasion fleet. His aircraft carried a special drop tank. This extended his range to over 1,000 nautical miles. The nimble fighter had been transformed into a long-range escort platform. This attack doctrine had emerged from Japan's earlier successes. The years 1941 and 1942 had belonged to Japanese naval aviation. Carrier-based strikes had devastated Pearl Harbor. Darwin had fallen to their coordinated attacks. Ceylon had burned under their bombs. Experienced pilots flying superior aircraft had achieved these stunning victories. Commander Minoru Genda had developed the tactics. His methods maximized the Zero's exceptional maneuverability. The aircraft's remarkable range gave Japan significant advantages. The concept relied on exploiting what the Zero did best. It could outturn any enemy fighter in existence. Its combat endurance exceeded American aircraft capabilities. A skilled pilot in a Zero could dominate aerial engagements. Superior positioning was everything. Energy management determined survival. Numerical disadvantage meant nothing if tactics were perfect. These principles had guided Japanese naval aviation to victory after victory. Now Task Force 58 represented America's answer. This was their most powerful carrier deployment since the war began. The 15 carriers included 6 Essex-class vessels. Each displaced 27,000 tons when fully loaded. Their reinforced flight decks had been designed specifically. They could operate much heavier aircraft than previous designs. This construction philosophy differed completely from Japanese thinking. Japanese carriers featured lightweight structures. They had been optimized for maximum aircraft capacity. Speed and numbers had been the priorities. American designers had chosen a different path. They prioritized durability over pure numbers. Damage control systems received careful attention. Enhanced survivability came at the cost of reduced speed. The F-6F Hellcat had entered service in late 1943. It represented America's direct response to combat experience. Lessons learned from fighting the Zero had shaped every design decision. Grumman engineers had studied captured Zero specimens. Pilot reports from combat had been analyzed carefully. The Hellcat was built specifically to counter Japanese fighters. The aircraft weighed roughly 12,000 pounds when fully loaded. A 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine provided the power. Maximum speed reached 380 miles per hour in level flight. This represented a significant improvement over earlier American fighters. Armor protection had been built into every critical area. 212 pounds of plate steel protected the pilot. The oil cooler received armored shielding. Oil tanks were protected from enemy fire. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented catastrophic fires. Enemy gunfire would no longer guarantee aircraft destruction. 650 caliber Browning machine guns provided the firepower. Each gun carried 400 rounds of ammunition. This armament exceeded anything Japanese fighters could deliver. The concentrated firepower could tear enemy aircraft apart. Pilot survival had become the top priority in American fighter design. The Japanese formation launched from 3 carriers. Taiho contributed its aircraft. Shokaku added its planes. Zuikaku completed the strike force. 128 aircraft climbed toward their targets. They approached Task Force 58 from the west. Their altitude reached 24,000 feet as they pressed forward. The pilots observed no American aircraft during their initial approach. This suggested they had achieved tactical surprise. The enemy fleet appeared unaware of their presence. Many pilots in the formation had completed training just months earlier. Their total flight time averaged less than 100 hours. Japan's accelerated training program had created these pilots. What previously required 3 years was now compressed into 6 months. Mounting pilot losses throughout 1943 had forced this change. Basic combat maneuvers received minimal attention. Navigation and formation flying occupied most training hours. Carrier landing practice averaged just 5 successful attempts before deployment. Lieutenant Junior Grade Takeshi Yamamoto represented the old guard. He was one of the few experienced pilots remaining. Over 600 combat hours had been accumulated since 1941. His experience included missions over the Dutch East Indies. Rabaul had been another combat zone. Japanese naval aviation had previously dominated every encounter. The Zero's reputation for invincibility had remained intact through 1942. Allied resistance had been increasing steadily. However, the Guadalcanal campaign had revealed troubling trends. American pilots were developing effective counter-tactics. The thatch-weave defensive maneuver negated the Zero's turning advantage. Hit-and-run attacks exploited the Zero's lack of armor protection. Ensign Hiroshi Tanaka flew as Yamamoto's wingman. He had graduated from abbreviated flight training just 10 weeks earlier. His total flight time amounted to only 75 hours. His knowledge of aerial combat remained purely theoretical. The fuel shortage had eliminated advanced combat training. Ammunition scarcity had limited gunnery practice to static targets. Most new pilots had never fired at moving aerial targets. Their weapons training had been conducted against stationary ground objects. This created severe limitations in actual combat situations. The contrast between veterans and replacements was stark. Experienced pilots had to engage enemy fighters while protecting inexperienced wingmen. This burden reduced overall formation effectiveness significantly. Veterans could not fully exploit their skills. They spent valuable time shepherding novices through combat. The inexperienced pilots lacked situational awareness. They required constant protection and guidance. American radar operators aboard USS Yorktown detected the incoming threat. The Japanese formation appeared on screens at 150 miles distance. This provided 20 minutes of advance warning. Visual contact would not occur for another quarter hour. Fighter director officers began vectoring combat air patrol fighters immediately. Precise radar plotting enabled coordinate interception. Fighters could be positioned for altitude and positional advantages. This technological capability had revolutionized aerial defense. Reactive scrambling was no longer necessary. Coordinated interception was now possible. The fighter director system represented revolutionary command and control. 2 years of combat experience had developed these capabilities. Each carrier maintained a combat information center. Trained officers tracked all airborne contacts using radar displays. Radio communications linked directors with airborne fighters. Real-time tactical guidance could be provided throughout engagements. This centralized control maximized defensive efficiency. Fighters could be concentrated at optimal intercept points. Multiple threats could be managed simultaneously. The system multiplied the effectiveness of available aircraft. Commander David McCampbell led VF-15's 1st Division from USS Essex. His 12 Hellcats climbed toward the incoming raid. Military power settings pushed them skyward rapidly. The formation remained tight while following radar vectors. Each pilot knew his assigned target area. These pilots averaged over 300 hours of flight time each. Extensive gunnery training had been completed stateside. Tactical instruction had been thorough and comprehensive. The American training program had expanded dramatically throughout 1943. 10,000 new naval aviators were being produced annually. Operational training units provided 500 hours total flight time. 150 of those hours were in combat aircraft types. Advanced fighter training emphasized specific skills. Deflection shooting received careful attention. Energy management was practiced extensively. Coordinated team tactics were rehearsed against various aircraft. The training aircraft simulated enemy capabilities. Pilots learned to fight dissimilar aircraft types. They understood how to exploit enemy weaknesses. They knew how to maximize their own advantages. The Hellcats' design philosophy prioritized pilot survival above all else. Comprehensive protection systems had been integrated throughout. Armor plates surrounded the cockpit completely. The seat back was armored. The headrest included protection. Floor panels were reinforced. Total armor weight exceeded 200 pounds. The bulletproof windscreen consisted of thick laminated glass. 1.5 inches of protection could stop rifle-caliber rounds. Point-blank shots would not penetrate this barrier. Self-sealing fuel tanks used multiple rubber layers. Punctures would cause the material to expand. Fuel leaks and fires were prevented automatically. The robust airframe could withstand significant battle damage. Structural integrity remained intact despite hits. Test flights had demonstrated remarkable durability. Multiple 20mm cannon hits could be absorbed. The aircraft remained controllable throughout. This durability provided crucial psychological confidence. Pilots knew their aircraft could survive encounters. Enemy fighters would be destroyed by hits that Hellcats could absorb. This knowledge affected combat performance significantly. Aggressive tactics became possible when survival was more likely. The Japanese formation encountered the first Hellcats at 09:15 hours. The meeting point was approximately 90 miles west of Guam. American fighters attacked from above and behind. Their altitude advantage enabled high-speed diving passes. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Ensign Tanaka broke left attempting to force an overshoot. Traditional Zero tactics called for sharp turning maneuvers. The Hellcat followed his turn with surprising agility. The American fighter's superior power allowed sustained turning. High-speed maneuvering was possible where Zero controls became heavy. Multiple 50-caliber rounds struck Tanaka's aircraft. Control cables were severed by the impacts. Fuel tanks were punctured by armor-piercing rounds. The tanks ignited immediately upon impact. The Zero's lack of armor protection proved catastrophic. Rounds penetrated the thin aluminum structure easily. Tanaka's aircraft exploded when flames reached the wing fuel tanks. The Zero's vulnerability to concentrated firepower became apparent. This shocking destruction contradicted everything Japanese pilots believed. Their aircraft's combat superiority was suddenly in question. The psychological impact spread through the formation rapidly. Pilots witnessed their fighters destroyed with apparent ease. The myth of Zero invincibility was cracking. Fear began to replace confidence in the cockpits. The enemy fighters seemed purpose-built to kill Zeros. Commander McCampbell's division executed coordinated attacks. The tactics were disciplined and methodical. Superior speed and firepower were exploited ruthlessly. Hellcats dove from 28,000 feet altitude. Attack runs reached 450 miles per hour. Zoom climbs returned them to perch positions. This energy-based approach negated Zero maneuverability advantages. The Japanese aircraft's inferior high-speed handling was exploited. Traditional turning engagements were avoided completely. American pilots maintained strict energy discipline. Low-speed turning battles were refused. Zero pilots could not force Americans into sustained dogfights. The Hellcats dictated combat terms throughout. Remarkable teamwork was demonstrated by American pilots. Wingmen protected leaders during attack runs. Mutual support was maintained throughout engagements. This coordination reflected extensive training. Multi-aircraft tactical instruction emphasized section tactics. Division-level coordination was practiced repeatedly. Individual combat skills were less important than team effectiveness. The Hellcats' robust radio equipment enabled clear communications. Electromagnetic interference from multiple transmissions was manageable. Japanese pilots struggled with inferior radio systems. Static and feedback made communications difficult. Many Zero pilots disabled their radios entirely. Hand signals and pre-briefed formations became their only coordination. This communication breakdown compounded tactical disadvantages. Japanese formations fragmented under coordinated attacks. Unit cohesion dissolved rapidly under pressure. The first engagement ended with severe Japanese losses. 12 Zeros fell to Hellcat guns within 8 minutes. American pilots observed characteristics contradicting intelligence estimates. Japanese fighters demonstrated poor gunnery skills. Most bursts passed harmlessly behind targets. Evasive maneuvers followed predictable patterns. Inadequate combat training was apparent. Limited tactical repertoire was obvious. Several Japanese pilots abandoned advantageous positions. Confusion and inexperience caused tactical errors. Brief opportunities were missed through poor judgment. Lieutenant Alexander Vrasiu, from VF-16 aboard Lexington, intercepted another formation. A second Japanese group was attempting to penetrate the fighter screen. His section of 4 Hellcats engaged 12 enemy aircraft. The engagement lasted 8 minutes. 6 enemy planes were shot down. Vrasiu expended only 360 rounds from his 2,400-round ammunition load. American gunnery training effectiveness was demonstrated clearly. The concentrated firepower of 650 caliber guns proved overwhelming. The Zero's fragile structure could not withstand this punishment. Short bursts produced immediate catastrophic damage. Wings separated from fuselages. Engines exploded under concentrated fire. Fuel tanks ignited from incendiary rounds. The technological disparity became increasingly apparent. Hellcats absorbed multiple hits from Japanese machine guns. 7.7mm rounds caused minimal damage. American aircraft continued fighting despite battle damage. 0 aircraft disintegrated under concentrated fire. Explosions occurred after just seconds of accurate shooting. The Zero's 20mm cannons posed theoretical threats. Low muzzle velocity reduced practical effectiveness. Limited ammunition supplies created problems. Poor fire discipline caused rapid ammunition depletion. Rifle-caliber machine guns were inadequate for subsequent engagements. Radar-directed fighter control enabled efficient management. American fighters were positioned at optimal intercept points. Fighter direction officers maintained complete tactical awareness. Radar tracking and pilot reports provided comprehensive information. Fresh fighters were positioned strategically. This systematic defense prevented coordinated mass attacks. Japanese formations arrived piecemeal. Concentrated Hellcat formations waited at maximum advantage positions. Progressive attrition occurred before effective attack range was reached. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his second wave at 0856 hours. 128 aircraft comprised this massive strike. 48 Zero fighters provided escort. 53 Judy dive bombers carried the main attack. 27 Jill torpedo bombers completed the formation. Sheer numbers were intended to overwhelm American defenses. Inexperienced pilots struggled with basic navigation. Formations fragmented during the long approach flight. Several groups became lost entirely. They wandered aimlessly while consuming precious fuel reserves. Finding targets became problematic without proper navigation skills. Lieutenant Russell Reiserer from VF-31 aboard USS Cabot intercepted the leading elements. The second wave was still 60 miles from the task force. His division of Hellcats attacked from up-sun position. Complete tactical surprise was achieved against the enemy formation. Japanese pilots failed to maintain proper lookout doctrine. Americans approached undetected until opening fire. Within minutes, 5 enemy aircraft spiraled toward the ocean. Smoke and flames trailed from catastrophic structural damage. Surviving Japanese aircraft attempted to continue their attack run. Successive Hellcat formations were positioned at different altitudes. Each American interception followed similar patterns. Diving attacks came from superior altitude positions. Zoom climbs returned fighters to perch positions. Hellcats maintained energy advantages throughout engagements. Combat terms were dictated by American fighters. Japanese pilots found no opportunities for effective retaliation. Superior aircraft performance combined with energy management training. The Hellcats' advantages were maximized systematically. Japanese pilots had trained for close-range maneuvering combat. High-speed engagements made the Zero unmanageable. Control surfaces became heavy and unresponsive. The aircraft that dominated at low speeds was helpless at high speeds. The second wave's attack on Task Force 58 achieved minimal results. Survivors penetrated the fighter screen in scattered groups. Anti-aircraft fire from screening destroyers created dense barrage patterns. Cruisers added their firepower to the defensive wall. Attacking formations were further dispersed by this fire. Proximity fuse shells created deadly airbursts. The few Japanese aircraft reaching the carriers encountered concentrated defensive fire. Multiple vessels fired simultaneously at each attacker. Only one torpedo bomber successfully launched its weapon. USS Indiana easily evaded through timely maneuvering. The torpedo passed harmlessly by the massive hull. The attack had failed completely, despite overwhelming numbers. Commander McCampbell led VF-15's second strike against the third wave. The encounter occurred at 1100 hours. His formation of 12 Hellcats engaged over 40 enemy aircraft. The running battle lasted 20 minutes. American training advantages were demonstrated repeatedly. McCampbell personally destroyed 7 Japanese planes. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, accounted for 4 additional victories. Experienced pilots exploited every enemy mistake. Japanese formations dissolved into individual aircraft. Coordinated attacks were abandoned completely. Individual survival became the only priority. Attack missions were forgotten entirely. Overwhelming fighter opposition made bombing impossible. Lieutenant Commander Kenji Suzuki observed the destruction from his damaged Zero. His aircraft struggled back toward the Japanese fleet. Multiple .50 caliber holes punctured wings and fuselage. One elevator cable had been severed completely. The engine ran rough and threatened to quit. The severe losses exceeded anything experienced previously. Even Midway had not been this devastating. At least some aircraft had successfully attacked enemy ships there. Today's operations achieved virtually nothing. Dozens of aircraft were lost for no gain. Irreplaceable pilots were being slaughtered wholesale. The intelligence failure became apparent to surviving pilots. They reported encountering an entirely new American fighter. Performance characteristics were unprecedented in their experience. Previous intelligence estimates had been based on captured F-4F Wildcats. Those reports suggested American fighters remained inferior to updated Zero variants. Performance parameters favored Japanese aircraft in all areas except diving speed. The Hellcats' ability to outclimb and outturn at high speed contradicted every assumption. Japanese tactical planning had been based on faulty intelligence. The enemy fighter appeared purpose-built to exploit Zero weaknesses. Traditional advantages were negated completely. Every assumption underlying combat doctrine was proving false. Aboard Taiho, Admiral Ozawa received fragmentary reports. Catastrophic losses were indicated among all 3 attack waves. Surviving pilots described overwhelming fighter opposition. American aircraft appeared at every altitude and direction. The coordinated defensive system prevented concentration of attacks. Disproportionate attrition was being achieved against Japanese formations. Radio intercepts suggested American losses remained minimal. Superior numbers meant nothing against this defensive system. The morning's operations were proving to be a complete disaster. Air operations officers tallied mounting casualties. Aircraft were failing to return from their missions. The first wave had launched 69 aircraft. Only 27 returned to their carriers. Many bore significant battle damage from the encounters. The second wave suffered even worse casualties. Barely 1/3 of 128 aircraft survived the gauntlet. These losses represented more than just aircraft. Irreplaceable pilots had been killed or captured. Their training had required years of peacetime development. The implications extended beyond immediate tactical defeat. Strategic collapse of Japanese naval aviation capability was occurring. The returning pilots exhibited signs of severe psychological trauma. Young aviators described terror and helplessness facing invulnerable enemies. Their machine guns appeared completely ineffective. American 50s tore their aircraft apart with devastating efficiency. The myth of Zero invincibility was shattered completely. Squadron mates were being destroyed without opportunity for resistance. Veteran pilots like Yamamoto struggled to comprehend the reversal. Aerial superiority had belonged to Japan throughout the war's early years. Tactical methods developed through successful campaigns no longer functioned. China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific victories meant nothing now. Years of combat experience became meaningless. The enemy refused engagement on terms where Japanese pilots excelled. The psychological foundation of Japanese naval aviation was crumbling. Technical superiority and pilot skill had been the cornerstones. Morale aboard Japanese carriers plummeted rapidly. Maintenance crews counted empty parking spots. Aircraft should have returned to fill those spaces. Flight decks designed to operate 75 aircraft each now held scattered remnants. Once powerful air groups were being destroyed systematically. Mechanics and armorers stood idle. No machines required servicing. No weapons needed loading. The human dimension of defeat became apparent. Friends and squad mates were failing to return. What had promised decisive victory was becoming catastrophic defeat. Admiral Ozawa contemplated continuing operations. Drastically reduced air groups remained available. The fourth wave of 82 aircraft was prepared for launch. Reconnaissance reports indicated American carriers maintained full combat capability. 3 massive attacks had achieved nothing significant. Sacrificing additional pilots and aircraft seemed pointless. The enemy demonstrated overwhelming tactical and technical superiority. Yet withdrawal would abandon the Saipan garrison completely. Defeat in the decisive battle for Pacific supremacy would be acknowledged. Communication breakdown between commanders and aircrews was critical. Accurate battle assessment proved impossible. Surviving pilots provided conflicting reports about enemy capabilities. Staff officers struggled to compile coherent tactical analysis. Traditional Japanese emphasis on spiritual determination prevented honest evaluation. Material factors were considered less important than fighting spirit. Many commanders refused to acknowledge enemy fighter superiority. Numerical advantage should guarantee success, regardless of equipment differences. The F-6F Hellcat's dominance stemmed from comprehensive design advantages. Every aspect of aerial combat had been addressed. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine produced 2,000 horsepower. This nearly doubled the Zero's 1130 horsepower Sakai 21 engine. Power advantages translated into superior performance. Climb rate exceeded Zero capabilities significantly. Acceleration was dramatically improved. High-altitude performance was superior, where thin air reduced Zero power to weight ratios. The Hellcat climbed at 3,500 feet per minute. The Zero managed only 2,600 feet per minute. American pilots could maintain energy advantages throughout engagements. Superior altitude could be achieved and maintained. Hellcat armament delivered devastating firepower. 650 caliber Browning machine guns carried ample ammunition loads. 400 rounds per gun provided extensive engagement capability. Each gun fired 850 rounds per minute. Muzzle velocity reached 2,900 feet per second. Flat trajectory and hitting power were maintained at combat ranges. Total firepower exceeded 100 rounds per second. Armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate engine blocks. Fuel tank ignition was virtually guaranteed with hits. Ammunition supply provided 30 seconds of sustained fire. Multiple engagement opportunities were available. Ammunition conservation was not required. The Zero's armament combined 20-millimeter cannons with machine guns. Theoretical firepower advantages existed through explosive cannon shells. However, cannon low muzzle velocity created trajectory problems. 2,460 feet per second created significant drop. Different aiming points were required from machine guns. Limited ammunition of 60 rounds per cannon forced fire conservation. Practical rate of fire was reduced during extended engagements. Machine guns lacked stopping power against armored American fighters. 700 rounds per gun could not compensate for inadequate penetration. American radar technology provided decisive tactical advantages. Early warning capabilities were revolutionary. Fighter direction systems enabled coordinated defense. The SK Air Search radar system reaches out across 100 miles of ocean. It finds aircraft before they become visible dots on the horizon. The SM height-finding radar works alongside it. This system measures altitude with precision down to 500 feet. Both systems feed their information into the combat information centers below deck. Inside these centers, trained officers work at vertical plotting boards. They mark every contact with careful precision. Each blip on the screen becomes a symbol on the board. Fighter director officers watch these displays constantly. They use VHF radio equipment to guide defending fighters. Their voices cut through atmospheric interference with crystal clarity. This integrated system changes everything about aerial defense. No longer do individual pilots rely on their own eyes and instincts. Instead, coordinated tactical operations maximize defensive efficiency. Every fighter becomes part of a larger defensive web. The system transforms chaos into order. Japanese carriers struggle without effective radar systems. Most vessels depend on human eyes for air defense coordination. Lookouts scan the skies through binoculars. They strain their vision against the glare of sun and clouds. The Type 21 air search radar appears on some carriers, but this equipment provides only 60 miles of detection range. Reliability problems plague the system. False contacts confuse operators constantly. Without height-finding capability, Japanese defenders guess at incoming altitude. Without integrated fighter direction, combat air patrols operate alone. They follow pre-war tactical doctrine that assumes individual initiative will prevail. The absence of centralized control creates fatal gaps. Efficient fighter allocation against multiple incoming raids becomes impossible. Tactical flexibility during engagements suffers accordingly. By late 1944, the quality gap becomes a chasm. A new Japanese Navy pilot completes graduation with just 40 hours of flying time. His American opponent enters combat with at least 525 hours in his logbook. The numbers tell a stark story of preparation versus desperation. American pilots receive extensive gunnery training throughout their preparation. Camera guns record their accuracy during simulated combat sessions. Instructors analyze every burst. They identify mistakes and correct technique. Formation tactics receive equal emphasis with marksmanship. Pilots learn energy management principles that save lives. Mutual support becomes second nature. Section tactics develop through advanced training phases. Operational training units provide realistic combat preparation. Experienced instructors rotate in from frontline squadrons. They bring recent combat knowledge directly to new pilots. Every lesson carries the weight of survival in actual battle. Japanese replacement pilots average just 100 hours total flight time. Minimal combat training precedes operational deployment. The fuel shortage forces dangerous compromises in preparation. Ground instruction replaces actual flying hours. Limited fuel means training in obsolete aircraft. Most pilots never fire weapons at aerial targets before entering combat. Formation flying emphasizes parade ground precision over tactical flexibility. The abbreviated training program eliminates essential skills. Aerobatics disappear from the curriculum. Instrument flying becomes a luxury they cannot afford. Night operations vanish entirely. These subjects were considered essential in the pre-war curriculum. Their absence creates pilots who lack fundamental capabilities. The qualitative difference in pilot capability magnifies aircraft performance disparities. Every aerial engagement reveals this growing gap. American pilots exploit advantages that Japanese pilots cannot counter. The fourth Japanese wave launches despite mounting evidence everywhere. Catastrophic losses among earlier strikes become obvious. Radio calls grow desperate. Return flights dwindle to almost nothing. Yet Admiral Ozawa commits his remaining 82 aircraft. He hopes to achieve some damage against American carriers. The plan involves withdrawing westward after this final strike. These aircraft encounter even more intense fighter opposition than before. American carriers have recovered their planes. They have refueled exhausted fighters. Fresh combat air patrols launch to replace depleted squadrons. The systematic destruction continues with mechanical precision. Hellcats position themselves at multiple altitudes. They engage each incoming group with overwhelming force. By 14:30 hours, American search aircraft locate the Japanese fleet. The enemy sits 275 miles west, northwest of Task Force 58. Admiral Mitcher launches a maximum effort strike despite the extreme range. 216 aircraft thunder off carrier decks. Fuel management becomes critical at this distance. The American strike includes 85 Hellcat fighters. This demonstrates offensive capability beyond pure fleet defense roles. Japanese carriers struggle to maintain minimal defensive patrols. Their surviving aircraft number in dozens rather than hundreds. American carriers surge overwhelming offensive power in the opposite direction. The role reversal from morning defensive success to afternoon offensive operations showcases American operational superiority. Initiative has passed completely to American hands. The American strike finds Japanese carriers virtually defenseless. Only 35 operational fighters remain from over 400 aircraft available that morning. The math speaks to catastrophic attrition. Hellcat fighters sweep aside token opposition with contemptuous ease. Dive bombers and torpedo planes attack without significant interference. No coordinated defense materializes to challenge them. The carrier Hio sinks after multiple torpedo hits breach her hull. Water rushes into compartments faster than damage control can respond. Zuikaku and Chiyoda suffer severe damage from bomb strikes. Explosions shake their structures. Fires spread across flight decks. Japanese anti-aircraft fire proves ineffective against coordinated attacks. American pilots press home their attacks with determination born of experience. The return flight occurs after sunset creates new challenges. Navigation becomes critical as pilots struggle in darkness. They search for their carriers across vast expanses of black ocean. Admiral Mitcher makes an unprecedented decision under these circumstances. He orders his carriers illuminated despite submarine threats. Searchlights pierce the darkness. Flight deck lights create beacons in the night. This calculated risk prioritizes aircrew recovery over ship security. The decision demonstrates American confidence in their tactical position. Despite losing 80 aircraft to fuel exhaustion and night landing accidents, personnel recovery reaches 85%. Destroyers rescue pilots from dark waters. The operational tempo continues without pause. Carriers prepare for dawn searches to locate the retreating Japanese fleet. Their flight decks bustle with activity through the night. Admiral Ozawa's withdrawal acknowledges complete defeat. Only 35 operational aircraft remain from 430 embarked that morning. The Japanese fleet that entered battle expecting decisive victory retreats in defeat. They have accomplished nothing beyond confirming American aerial supremacy. The loss ratio exceeds 10-1 in favor of American forces. Japanese naval aviation has been effectively eliminated as an offensive force. The implications extend far beyond immediate tactical defeat. Japan lacks resources to rebuild carrier air groups effectively. American forces approach the home islands, while Japanese resistance crumbles. Time works entirely in America's favor now. The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrates technological superiority's power. Combined with superior training, it can completely negate enemy tactical doctrine. determination and experience become irrelevant against overwhelming advantages. Japanese naval aviation built its reputation on superior aircraft initially. Extensively trained pilots achieved decisive victories throughout 1941 and 1942. The Zero fighter dominated every opponent through exceptional maneuverability and range. Pilots accumulated combat experience across multiple successful campaigns. This combination created psychological supremacy over Allied forces. Allied pilots entered combat expecting defeat against Japanese fighters. Fear became a factor before engagement even began. The Hellcat's introduction reverses this dynamic completely. Purpose-built design specifically counters Japanese advantages. American designers accepted weight penalties for armor protection. Self-sealing fuel tanks add more weight. These features create aircraft that survive damage, destroying Zeros instantly. The powerful engine provides performance margins, allowing tactical flexibility. American pilots can dictate engagement terms at will. They avoid situations where Zeros excel while exploiting their own advantages. The massive firepower of 650 caliber guns overwhelms Japanese aircraft structures. These structures were designed for minimum weight rather than battle damage resistance. American shells tear through aluminum like paper. The American training system's expansion demonstrates industrial age warfare's triumph. It defeats craftsman tradition through systematic preparation. While Japan struggles to train hundreds of replacement pilots using abbreviated programs, America trains thousands. Systematic curriculum develops through operational analysis. Assembly line approaches to pilot production achieve consistent quality. Standardized instruction ensures every graduate meets minimum standards. Extensive flying hours build confidence and competence simultaneously. Each American pilot represents an interchangeable component. The naval aviation system can absorb losses and continue functioning. Japanese pilots become irreplaceable individuals whose loss cripples unit effectiveness. This fundamental difference determines the war's outcome. The radar-directed fighter control system exemplifies technological force multiplication. It exceeds individual aircraft capabilities through integration. The ability to position fighters optimally before visual contact negates Japanese tactical surprise. It maximizes defensive efficiency through scientific coordination. This systematic approach transforms carrier task forces. They evolve from vulnerable targets to nearly impregnable fortresses against conventional air attack. Integration of sensors, communications, and command functions creates synergy. The capabilities exceed the sum of individual components. Japanese naval doctrine fails to adapt to changing circumstances. This failure proves fatal when pre-war assumptions encounter wartime reality. The emphasis on offensive operations using carrier aviation becomes obsolete. Seeking decisive victory through single engagements becomes irrelevant against enemies who refuse such terms. American forces accept gradual attrition through sustained operations. They avoid climactic battles for theater supremacy. This operational patience, combined with industrial superiority, guarantees eventual victory. Individual engagement outcomes become less important than cumulative effects over time. The human cost extends beyond aircraft and pilots. Institutional knowledge accumulated through years disappears rapidly. Japan's pre-war naval aviators represented an elite cadre. Their skills required extensive development through rigorous selection processes. Years of training created exceptional capabilities. Their loss cannot be replaced through abbreviated wartime programs. These programs produce pilots with minimal competence rather than excellence. The qualitative decline becomes self-reinforcing over time. Inexperienced pilots suffer disproportionate losses in combat. This further degrades overall force effectiveness. Each battle weakens the survivors while strengthening their opponents through experience. Task Force 58 continues operations off Saipan despite Japanese attempts. The invasion proceeds according to schedule. Japanese efforts to disrupt through carrier aviation have failed completely. The morning of June 20th brings renewed searches. American pilots hunt for the retreating Japanese fleet. Defensive patrols maintain vigilance against potential land-based attacks. American pilots who survived yesterday's combat describe it vividly. They call it just like an old-time turkey shoot. This comparison gives the battle its enduring nickname. The term captures both aspects of the aerial combat. The one-sided nature becomes obvious to participants. The mechanical efficiency of destroying Japanese aircraft resembles target practice more than combat. The final tally reveals the catastrophic scale of Japanese defeat. 445 aircraft destroyed in 2 days. This includes 395 carrier planes and approximately 50 land-based aircraft. American losses total 123 aircraft. 80 fall to operational accidents rather than enemy action. Fuel exhaustion claims many during the long return flight. Night landing accidents account for others. Only 43 American planes fall to Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire. This occurs during 2 days of intense aerial combat. The 10-to-1 exchange ratio exceeds any previous carrier battle. It surpasses even the decisive American victory at Midway. More significantly, Japan loses over 400 pilots. This includes instructors recalled from training units. They represented the last reservoir of experienced naval aviators. Admiral Ozawa reports to Combined Fleet Headquarters afterward. He acknowledges the effective destruction of Japanese carrier aviation as an offensive force. The surviving carriers possess ships and aircraft, but lack trained pilots. These pilots must be capable of conducting effective operations against American forces. The mobile fleet sought decisive victory, but returns having demonstrated only American aerial supremacy. The strategic implications become apparent immediately. American forces continue advancing toward Japan without meaningful aerial opposition. The Imperial Navy cannot contest their progress effectively. The technological revolution in naval warfare, demonstrated at Philippine Sea, influences post-war aviation development worldwide. Integration of radar, communications, and fighter control establishes patterns. Every major Navy-seeking carrier aviation capability follows these patterns. The emphasis on pilot survivability through aircraft protection becomes standard practice. Systematic training replaces pre-war acceptance of attrition. The Hellcat itself continues serving through the Korean War. Adaptation for ground attack missions exploits its robust construction and heavy armament. These characteristics prove valuable in different roles. American industrial superiority ultimately proves decisive. Quantity and quality advantages overwhelm Japanese forces completely. Tactical innovation and individual courage cannot overcome these disparities. The ability to produce thousands of aircraft monthly while training pilots creates insurmountable numerical superiority. Each American loss can be replaced multiple times. Japanese losses become permanent degradation of combat capability. Production statistics reveal the hopelessness of Japan's position clearly. America produces 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. Japan manages only 28,000 despite total national mobilization. The industrial gap widens rather than narrows as the war progresses. The Hellcat achieves the highest kill ratio of any American fighter. 5,223 confirmed victories against 270 losses in aerial combat. This 19-to-1 ratio exceeds every other aircraft type performance. It accounts for 75% of all Navy aerial victories. This occurs despite entering service halfway through the war. The F-6F validates design philosophy, prioritizing pilot survival and firepower. Pure performance metrics become secondary considerations. Veterans consistently praise the Hellcat's forgiving flight characteristics. Its ability to absorb battle damage while maintaining combat effectiveness impresses pilots. These qualities save lives while achieving military objectives. Japanese naval aviation never recovers from the Marianas disaster. It becomes relegated to desperate kamikaze attacks afterward. These sacrifice pilots and aircraft for minimal strategic impact. The institutional knowledge accumulated through decades disappears. A single day's combat against superior American forces eliminates this experience. Transfer to the next generation becomes impossible. The Zero fighter that symbolized Japanese aerial supremacy becomes synonymous with obsolescence. Vulnerability against modern American fighters defines its final period. The psychological impact extends beyond military defeat. National recognition emerges that spiritual determination cannot overcome material inferiority. Industrial democracies possess arsenals that authoritarian states cannot match. The Battle of the Philippine Sea represents the culmination of American naval aviation development. The journey from Pearl Harbor's disaster leads to methodical construction of overwhelming superiority. Carrier task forces that Japan attacked in 1941 return multiplied tenfold. Superior aircraft, pilots, and tactical doctrine make them unstoppable. The transformation from desperate defense to offensive supremacy occurs systematically. Industrial resources, technological innovation, and operational analysis combine effectively. The Hellcat fighter embodies this evolution completely. Reactive response to Japanese initiative becomes purposeful dominance through superior design and employment. Admiral Mitcher's after-action report emphasizes the totality of American victory. He acknowledges the fortunate circumstances that concentrated Japanese attacks against prepared defenses. The combination of radar warning, fighter direction, and superior aircraft creates perfect conditions. Defensive success against conventional air attacks becomes almost guaranteed. However, he warns that future enemies might develop asymmetric responses. Continued innovation becomes necessary rather than reliance on proven formulas. This prescient observation anticipates the kamikaze phenomenon emerging later. Japan's desperate attempts to offset conventional inferiority lead to suicide tactics. The individual pilot experiences reveal the human dimension beyond statistics. American pilots describe the surreal experience of shooting down multiple enemy aircraft with minimal effort. They feel sympathy for opponents flying obsolete aircraft with inadequate training. Victory brings little satisfaction when opponents cannot fight effectively. Japanese survivors recount the horror of watching squadron mates destroyed. They lack opportunity for effective resistance against seemingly invulnerable enemies. Personal narratives capture warfare's essential tragedy. Technological superiority translates into human suffering regardless of individual courage or determination. The Marianas Turkey Shoot enters aviation history as demonstration of American aerial supremacy. Achievement comes through systematic superiority in training, technology, and tactical doctrine. The battle proves that modern warfare rewards industrial capability and scientific advancement. Warrior tradition and spiritual determination become insufficient against material advantages. Japan's attempt to achieve decisive victory through conventional carrier aviation ends catastrophically. The defeat eliminates their naval aviation as an effective force permanently. The Imperial Navy that dominated the Pacific in 1942 becomes incapable of meaningful offensive operations by June 1944. Strategic consequences extend beyond immediate military defeat. Fundamental reassessment of warfare's nature in the industrial age becomes necessary. Japan's military leadership must confront reality. Their nation lacks resources to compete with American production capability. Tactical innovation cannot overcome this fundamental disadvantage. The decision to continue fighting despite mathematical certainty of defeat reflects cultural factors. Inability to accept surrender overcomes rational strategic calculation. The kamikaze phenomenon emerges from this cognitive dissonance. Accepting defeat's inevitability while refusing its implications creates desperate responses. The sinking of carriers Shokaku and Taiho by American submarines compounds aerial defeat. These losses occur on June 19th during the battle. Irreplaceable platforms disappear along with their experienced crews. Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor and every major carrier battle except Midway, succumbs to torpedoes. USS Kavala delivers the fatal blow while the carrier refuels aircraft. Taiho, Japan's newest and most advanced carrier with armored flight deck, sinks from a single torpedo hit. Catastrophic vapor explosions follow the initial damage. These losses eliminate not just ships, but institutional experience. Their crews cannot be replaced before war's end. The technological and training advantages demonstrated during the Marianas Turkey Shoot establish lasting patterns. They continue throughout the Pacific War's remainder. American forces advance inexorably toward Japan. Japanese forces attempt increasingly desperate defensive measures without meaningful success. Carrier task forces that seemed vulnerable to Japanese attack in 1941 become unstoppable instruments of American power projection by 1944. Transformation from defensive response to offensive supremacy occurs through methodical application. Industrial democracy's advantages overcome militaristic democracy's limitations systematically. The battle's aftermath sees American carriers continuing operations off Saipan. Japanese survivors retreat to anchorages beyond American aircraft range. The invasion proceeds without meaningful interference. Japanese naval aviation has ceased to exist as an effective force. Airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam soon host B-29 bombers. Strategic bombing reaches Japan's home islands directly. The carrier battle intended to prevent this outcome instead confirms American ability to project power wherever national strategy requires. Veterans of the Philippine Sea Battle remember the morning of June 19, 1944, distinctly. They witnessed the day American naval aviation achieved unquestioned supremacy over Japanese opponents. Months of preparation, training, and technological development culminate in hours of aerial combat. These hours eliminate Japanese carrier aviation's offensive capability permanently. The Hellcat fighter proves itself as the weapon transforming American carriers. They evolve from vulnerable targets into dominant instruments of naval power. The pilots flying these aircraft demonstrate that systematic training produces competent aviators in quantity. They overwhelm elite opponents through numerical and qualitative superiority combined. Lessons learned from the Marianas Turkey Shoot influence naval aviation development for decades. Nations recognize the importance of integrating technology, training, and tactical doctrine. Emphasis on pilot survivability through aircraft protection becomes standard design philosophy. Radar-directed fighter control establishes patterns for fleet air defense worldwide. The American victory demonstrates that industrial production capacity combined with technological innovation creates military superiority. Traditional military virtues cannot overcome these advantages alone. The battle stands as testament to democracy's ability to mobilize resources effectively. When national survival demands total commitment, democratic nations can respond decisively against authoritarian aggression. The human cost measured in Japanese lives lost during futile attacks represents warfare's essential tragedy. Young Japanese pilots who dreamed of glory defending their homeland die in obsolete aircraft instead. They face overwhelming enemies they cannot effectively engage. Their sacrifice achieves nothing beyond demonstrating American superiority. Japan's remaining reservoir of trained aviators depletes without strategic gain. Survivor's guilt experienced by pilots returning from missions where squadron mates perish becomes defining characteristic. Japanese naval aviation's final period carries this psychological burden. The F-6F Hellcat's success validates design philosophy, prioritizing pilot survival and consistent performance. Exceptional capability, requiring exceptional skill, becomes less important than reliability. Average American pilots achieve extraordinary results flying aircraft that forgive mistakes. Devastating firepower delivers against fragile opponents consistently. The Zero demands perfection from its pilots, while offering no margin for error. This becomes a liability when pilots lack extensive training and combat experience. The contrast between design philosophies reflects deeper cultural differences. Valuing human life versus achieving military objectives regardless of cost creates different approaches. The Battle of the Philippine Sea marks the end of carrier aviation as balanced competition. Opposing forces with complementary advantages no longer exist. American technological and training superiority creates conditions where combat becomes execution rather than contest. Outcomes become predetermined before engagements begin. Japanese pilots launching from carriers on June 19th fly into predetermined destruction. They lack realistic capability to achieve objectives against prepared American defenses. The turkey shoot metaphor captures this essential imbalance perfectly. One side holds overwhelming advantages, guaranteeing victory regardless of enemy actions. Strategic implications extend throughout the Pacific War's remainder. Japan cannot rebuild carrier aviation capability before eventual defeat. Pilots lost during one morning's combat represent years of training investment. Replacement through abbreviated programs producing marginally competent substitutes becomes impossible. Institutional knowledge accumulated through decades disappears when experienced pilots die. Opportunity to transfer skills to the next generation vanishes. Qualitative collapse becomes irreversible as inexperienced pilots suffer disproportionate losses. Subsequent operations further degrade overall effectiveness systematically. The morning of June 19, 1944, witnesses the destruction of Japanese naval aviation as an effective military force. Systematic demonstration of American superiority achieves this result. The F-6F Hellcat serves as the principal instrument of victory. It combines protective design, powerful armament, and superior performance. Average pilots can employ this aircraft effectively against any opposition. Integration of radar warning, fighter direction, and coordinated tactics creates defensive efficiency. This overwhelms Japanese attacks regardless of determination or tactical innovation. The battle proves that industrial democracy's arsenals can produce military superiority. Methodical application of technological and training advantages defeats traditional military opponents. These opponents rely on spiritual factors to overcome material disadvantages unsuccessfully. The Marianas Turkey Shoot enters history as the decisive moment American naval aviation achieved supremacy. This continues through the Pacific War's conclusion. Japanese carriers that once projected power throughout the Pacific become floating targets. American aircraft attack them without effective opposition. Transformation from Pearl Harbor's vulnerability to Philippine sea dominance demonstrates democracy's capacity for military regeneration. This occurs when facing existential threats requiring total national response. The battle stands as proof that freedom properly mobilized and directed can defeat aggression. Initial advantages held by authoritarian opponents who mistake temporary superiority for permanent dominance prove insufficient. Democratic resilience and industrial capacity ultimately prevail through sustained effort and scientific application of resources.